Hey guys, tonight we're going deep into the woods. Not just any woods though. Imagine a canopy so dense that daylight barely filters through the pine needles. The air smells like sap and rich soil, and every footstep crunches over 1,000 years of fallen leaves. You can't see more than a few feet ahead, and the silence? It's not peaceful. It's prehistoric. You've stepped into a forgotten forest in what will one day be called East Texas. No trails, no maps, just towering oaks and cypress, whispers in the wind, and the unsettling sense that you're not alone. You're here before the log cabins, before the sawmills, before Gilmer was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without at least one squirrel bite and a deep distrust of snakes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love seeing the sleepy crew checking in from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward slowly, boots sinking slightly into mossy ground. There are no fences here, no farms, not even a footpath. You are surrounded by what early settlers would call the Big Thicket, a sprawling wilderness of pine, oak, hickory, sweet gum, and ash. The trees are so tall and ancient they seem to scrape the belly of the sky. If you've ever seen satellite images of East Texas, you know this part of the world once looked like a solid green cloud from above. That's where you are now, deep inside the cloud, before any axe ever kissed bark. There are no towns here, no counties, not yet. The space we'll come to know as Upshur County is still a blank in the official records. Even the Republic of Texas hasn't drawn its lines through here yet. You are walking through something older, wilder, and eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of something four-legged slipping through the underbrush. Deer, razorback hog, or that raccoon who has been following you for 3 days with suspiciously human intelligence. As night falls, the forest takes on a blue-black tone. Trees turn into towering shadows. Owls begin their nightly commentary, short, skeptical calls like they're judging your life choices. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote lets out a high, desperate howl that doesn't so much end as fray into silence. You find a mossy rock and sit down. You're alone in a space untouched by towns, laws, or borders. But it won't stay untouched for long. Historians still argue whether the earliest European explorers even bothered to map this specific patch of forest, or if they skirted around it entirely, too spooked by stories from native tribes or too busy looking for easier land. But one thing's for sure, this place had residents long before the first settler wagon creaked into view. The Caddo were here first. Cultivated farmers, skilled potters, and lovers of ritual. They built raised mounds, planted corn, and lived in grass-thatched homes. Their footprint is mostly spiritual now, but you can still feel it. It's in the silence, in the shape of the land, in the odd feeling that the trees themselves are watching. Then came the Cherokee, expelled from Alabama in the early 1800s and drawn to this rich forested land. They were different from the Caddo, more mobile with a written language and a formal council. They built roads, they carried rifles, and they saw what was coming long before the settlers did. They lived here, right here, in these woods, for nearly 2 decades before being violently pushed out in 1839 by General Thomas Rusk and his troops. That blood has long since soaked into the soil, but the trees remember. You stand up and brush yourself off, continuing forward. Your hand touches the smooth trunk of a towering pine, and you pause to listen. The wind stirs the branches high above, an unbroken canopy, and you think, maybe for the first time, about how a tree lives longer than most dynasties. This pine might have sprouted while Shakespeare was still writing plays. It might outlive the town of Gilmer itself. Suddenly, something in the canopy cracks loud and sharp, like a branch giving way under weight. You flinch. Nothing falls, nothing stirs, but you swear you saw something moving. Not an animal, something heavier, stranger. In the years to come, this land will be full of people. Homesteads will pop up like mushrooms after rain. Children will build forts in hollow trees. Men will ride ox carts down roads that don't exist yet. But for now, the forest rules. You're a visitor here, and the welcome is cautious at best. You find a small clearing, likely made by deer bedding down, and start a modest fire. The sparks rise like fireflies and vanish into the black. You warm your hands and try not to think about the long list of things in this forest that don't mind eating humans. It's been a long day. Your feet ache. You chew a piece of dried venison, still gamey, and curl up under your coat. As you drift off, the night forest breathes around you. You hear a whippoorwill call, then a splash in a distant creek, then oddly the sound of something dragging in the leaves. Slow, measured. You sit up, but there's nothing there. Not a branch moves. It's a strange thing to fall asleep under an ancient tree knowing that tomorrow, this forest will never be the same. But for tonight, it is still whole, still wild, still untouched. The unbroken canopy arches above you, whispering stories into the wind, and waits for the men who will try to tame it.
The morning mist clings low across the forest floor, coiling like a silver ribbon between the trunks of pine and oak. You wake to the sound of dew dripping from branches onto your coat and the soft creak of trees adjusting themselves in the breeze. The fire you built is nothing but a circle of gray ash now, cold and scattered. You stretch slowly, rubbing your eyes, your breath still fogging in the air. The forest is unchanged, quiet, as if nothing happened overnight. But something did. The world shifted. Footsteps are coming. Not yours this time. You hear them before you see them. The low crunch of boots or hooves or wheels pushing through underbrush. A wagon creaks. Oxen snort. And then, through the trees, they appear. Not ghosts, not myths, but real, flesh and blood settlers. Families who have come west, chasing a dream no one could quite define. They're not here for gold or for glory. They're here for land, for space, for the promise of something called Texas. This is the 1830s, maybe 1835 if you're counting, and the people you see stepping off those wagons are tough in a way that can't be taught. One man is missing half a finger, still tying down his crates with twine. A woman carries a baby in one arm and a cast iron skillet in the other. There's a boy dragging a goat on a rope, and another child who looks suspiciously like he hasn't blinked in half an hour. They're not just visiting. They're planting themselves here like saplings, a new kind of growth in this old forest. They don't come all at once. It starts with a few. A veteran from Tennessee, a family from Alabama, a trader from Arkansas who swears he can read Cherokee trails like road signs. They settle near creeks, springs, anywhere with fresh water and shade. You watch them scout the land cautiously, each tree a potential beam, each rock a future doorstep. The forest watches too, silent and ancient. Historians still debate exactly how many people showed up in those first years. Records are hazy, land claims confused, and maps, let's just say creative. But everyone agrees that Upshur County didn't become Upshur County overnight. It started as nothing more than wilderness claimed by Nacogdoches County, then Harrison, and finally split into its own borders in 1846. That's still a decade away from now, though. Right now it's just trees and newcomers with big dreams and questionable footwear. At night, the forest becomes a testing ground. Coyotes come closer, fires are kept low, babies cry. Men sit around campfires talking in low voices about things they miss. Coffee, newspapers, someone to argue politics with. Women sew by firelight, heads nodding with exhaustion, while children stare up at the unfamiliar sky filled with stars too bright to ignore. There are no roads yet, just trails. Some worn by buffalo, some etched into the earth by the Cherokee long before these wagons ever rolled through here. One path in particular, the Cherokee Trace, winds right through here like a vein pulsing with history and conflict. You follow one of the families for days. They build their life in slow, determined movements. First a tent made of canvas and poles, then a lean-to, then slowly a cabin, pieced together with nothing more than axes, sweat, and a stubborn refusal to go back. You help them lift logs, stack stones for a chimney, and carve out a rough clearing for a garden that will fight the clay and the weeds every step of the way. Their food is mostly cornmeal, dried meat, and whatever they can hunt or barter. Every possession has a purpose. Every day has a task. There's no church yet, no school, no store. Just a handful of scattered homes where strangers become neighbors, not because they want to, but because there's no one else. Hospitality isn't a suggestion, it's survival. When someone knocks, you let them in. When someone's sick, you gather herbs or send a rider for help, even if help is 3 days away. People talk about community today, but here it's literal. If you don't build it together, it doesn't exist. One night, while the wind howls through the trees and wolves cry from across the valley, an old man tells a story. He says he once saw a ghost on the trace, a woman in white standing still under a full moon, her hair floating like smoke. The forest fell silent when she appeared. Not even the crickets dared make a sound. He says she disappeared when he blinked. No one laughs at him. Not because they believe him necessarily, but because after enough time in the woods, your certainty starts to unravel. Maybe the trees do hold more than just squirrels and secrets. The next morning, you wake to find a child missing. He's gone from the wagon bed where he slept. Panic spreads. Shouts echo through the forest. Everyone scatters searching. Hours pass. Finally, they find him, curled up beside a creek, asleep under a bent cedar tree. He said he heard someone humming, a song he didn't know but couldn't stop following. Again, no one laughs. You start to see how fragile it all is. This new life, these first roots, they're planting themselves in a place that doesn't want to be tamed. The forest pushes back. Winds knock down cabins. Rains flood clearings. Snakes slip into beds. And yet, no one leaves. By the end of the season, 5 more families have joined in. The clearings are bigger. Someone's building a mill by the creek. Another's trying to plant cotton. Word spreads that this land is good, even if it bites. And so more wagons creak their way into the thickets. More fires dot the night like tiny stars. The forest is still dominant, but it feels different now, less untouchable. The silence isn't so complete. The air carries the smell of smoke and horses and human persistence. You can't help but think, watching these people work and stumble and laugh despite it all, that maybe this is how a place begins. Not with a grand plan or a single heroic act, but with a handful of muddy boots and someone shouting timber before a tree falls. This isn't just a story about pioneers. It's about beginnings, about what it takes to turn raw, ancient land into a place someone can call home. You're not in a forest anymore. Not entirely. You're in something transforming. Slowly, reluctantly, but surely. And if the trees could speak, they might just whisper something new tonight. Not a warning, not a curse, but a name. Upshur.
You grip the axe handle tighter than you thought you would. It's heavier than it looks, rough against your palms, and the first swing barely leaves a mark. The pine tree in front of you seems unimpressed. Its bark shrugs off the blade like armor, thick with resin and older than anything you've ever owned. You step back, adjust your stance, and swing again. A solid thud. Chips fly. That's better. Again, until your shoulders burn and the forest floor is scattered with splinters. You're building a home. Or something close enough to pass for one. It's the early 1840s. The Republic of Texas has become part of the United States, but out here, that feels like a rumor. This corner of East Texas is still mostly trees and creeks and long, dangerous silences, and you're about to turn a single patch of it into your own. The first thing you learn is that pine cuts easier than oak, but warps if you're not careful. The second thing you learn is that nothing goes to waste. Bark becomes bedding, branches become kindling, and even the sticky sap gets used to patch leaks or soothe a burn. The third thing you learn is that a log cabin is not just walls and a roof. It's protection. It's pride. It's all you have between you and the long teeth of the wild. The logs go up slowly. You notch the corners by hand, fitting them together like puzzle pieces until the walls stand chest high. You build it near a spring because clean water is more valuable than gold out here. No one talks about plumbing. You dig a hole when you need one and you bathe with a cloth and a bucket. Every neighbor you have lives at least a mile away, so privacy isn't a concern. The forest does a good job of hiding you. For the roof, you cut boards from softer wood and cover it with bark, sometimes clay. You pray it won't leak in the first rain. Spoiler alert, it does. But you fix it with whatever you can find. That's the rule out here. You fix it or it stays broken. By the end of the second week, your hands are blistered, your back aches, and your clothes are torn, but you have walls, a roof, and a fire ring of stones. That makes it official. You're no longer just passing through. You're rooted. Historians still argue about how standardized these cabins were. Some say they followed classic Appalachian floor plans. Others think people just made it up as they went, hacking together whatever the woods gave them. Most likely, it was a little of both. You see styles borrowed from Tennessee, Alabama, even frontier Virginia. One-room boxes, side porch additions. Some even raise a loft with a ladder so the kids can sleep above the heat. It's not elegant. It's not straight, but it holds. Inside, the furniture is mostly logs and rough boards. You build a table from a split plank and balance it on stones. The bed is rope stretched between 4 posts with a straw tick mattress that creaks every time you shift. The fireplace is mud and stones, and the chimney leans slightly to the left. You joke it has character. What it has is smoke. Lots of it. You spend hours adjusting it, learning the wind until you can finally sit without coughing. Outside, you plant a small patch of corn and beans, maybe squash if you're lucky. The deer get into it, so you put up a crude fence of logs and woven branches. The fence barely works, but it makes you feel better. You spend your days chopping, stacking, mending, and watching. There's no rest, just rhythm. The rhythm of survival. One day, a man passes by with a wagon pulled by oxen. He's headed farther west. You trade him a piece of venison for a tin kettle. It's dented, but it doesn't leak. He tells you there's talk of a new settlement forming near the trace, maybe even a town someday. You nod even though you're not sure you believe it. Right now, you have no need for a town. You have trees, you have work, you have your cabin. You hang a horseshoe over the door for luck. Someone told you it keeps spirits out. Someone else said it invites them in. You decide to let the spirits sort it out themselves. At night, you lie awake and listen. The forest doesn't sleep. There's always something moving. An owl, a raccoon, once the unmistakable snort of a boar too close to the clearing. You keep your rifle loaded, not because you expect trouble, but because you know trouble doesn't send a warning. You name the cabin in your head. You don't speak it out loud. It feels like naming a child, too personal, too vulnerable. But you whisper it sometimes when you're alone, and it comforts you in a way you can't explain. There's a shelf by the door with tools, an old Bible you can barely read, a tin mug, a small wooden cross carved from ash and tied with twine. These aren't decorations, they're anchors, reminders of where you came from, of who you are, or were. There's a part of you that misses what you left behind. Roads, stores, neighbors who didn't shoot first and ask later. But there's another part of you, the part that wakes with the sunrise and eats in silence and swings the axe until your arms go numb, that feels more alive than you've ever been. This cabin, rough and leaning and smelling of smoke and pine, is more than a house. It's a declaration, a challenge to the wild, a monument to stubbornness. You built it from nothing. You'll keep it standing no matter what. And deep in the woods, somewhere beyond the clearing, a fox watches from the shadows, tail flicking once before it disappears into the brush. The forest knows you're here now. It's listening.
Inside the walls of your little cabin, life doesn't slow down, it deepens. Every object has a story. Every task is heavier than it looks. Your world has shrunk to 4 walls and a few yards of clearing, but it contains everything you need, or at least everything you can make. Because out here, if you don't make it, you don't have it. The mornings begin with smoke. You stir the ashes from the fireplace and coax a new flame from kindling. The coals hiss as you add damp wood. You pour water from the spring into your blackened kettle, and it boils with a quiet authority. There's no coffee, not yet, just hot water and maybe a scrap of herb if you're lucky. You sit on a stool you built yourself, legs uneven, and sip while staring at the wooden beams above your head. You built those too. And the rafters. And the shelves. This isn't a house. It's a factory of survival. The spinning wheel sits in the corner, creaking when the wind shifts. It's homemade, like nearly everything else, and you spend part of each evening feeding it with tufts of wool from the sheep you don't yet own, but hope to trade for. Until then, you use what's around you. You twist fibers from flax, sometimes even from the inner bark of trees. Primitive, yes, but you'd be surprised what necessity teaches. A loom stretches along the far wall, built from scrap timber and strung with lines that look more like traps than fabric. You weave slowly, clumsily at first, fingers calloused and awkward. The first result is a rough gray cloth, uneven and scratchy. But it holds. You cut it into crude pants, stitch them by hand, and tie them with cord. Congratulations! You're now wearing your own effort. Historians still debate whether most pioneers were truly self-sufficient or just adapted through desperate bartering with neighbors. The truth, like most things, lies in the middle. You do what you can, you trade what you can't. A neighbor trades you a pair of boots made from cured deer hide in exchange for a sack of dried beans and half a ham. You thank him, but the boots are stiff and rub your heels raw. You wear them anyway. You can't afford to be picky. On the floor near the fireplace lies a wooden mold for candles. You melt animal fat in a clay pot and pour it into the molds, using pieces of old rope as wicks. The smell is terrible, but the light is soft, flickering, and enough to read a page or two from your water-stained Bible at night. If you're too tired for that, you just stare into the flame until sleep comes. The walls of your home are decorated with tools, not pictures. A long-handled axe, a draw knife, a crooked spoon you carved from cedar, a small saw with teeth worn smooth from overuse. They hang like sacred objects, always within reach. You don't own much, but what you have is priceless. You'd trade a barrel of flour before you'd give up your best chisel. One wall holds baskets woven by your own hands. They store roots, herbs, and scraps of cloth too small for anything else. A barrel in the corner holds rainwater, filtered through gravel and cloth. Beside it sits your homemade soap, lumpy and strange smelling, but capable of removing at least some of the grime from your clothes and skin. You cook over the hearth using iron pots passed down or found. Meat is roasted on a spit. Cornbread bakes in a Dutch oven buried in coals. There's no salt, unless you've made a recent trip to Jefferson. No sugar either. Sweet comes from molasses or sorghum if you planted it. Your meals are plain, hearty, and monotonous, but they keep you going. Children, if you have them,
are already working. A 5-year-old may fetch water, sweep the cabin floor, or tend to chickens. An 8-year-old might know how to stitch, churn butter, or skin a rabbit. There's no such thing as too young to help. Play exists in moments stolen between chores, a game of tossing rocks or carving a toy soldier from scrap wood. Even laughter feels homemade. Outside, a pole structure holds smoked meat, draped with wet hide to keep insects off. You tan leather behind the cabin using a mix of lime and ash, scraping it until your arms ache. It smells awful. Everything smells awful, but you get used to it. Your spouse, if you have one, likely spends as much time as you do making things that modern people would never dream of creating by hand. A simple bonnet takes a day to sew. A pair of trousers, too. The spinning, weaving, stitching, it's relentless, but it's also strangely satisfying. You don't just wear your clothes, you remember making them. You remember the stories from the nights you sat by the fire, sewing in silence, save for the crackle of pine logs and the hoot of a distant owl. One evening, a neighbor visits with a strange contraption, something called a spinning jenny, made from scrap wheels and parts. He wants to trade it for preserves. You don't have preserves. You offer smoked venison instead. The trade is made. You try the machine, but it breaks on the second use. Still, you keep it. You might fix it, you might not. But it's a sign that invention is creeping into the woods. Slowly, unevenly. You have no money. None is needed. Trade is the currency. Skills are the bank. A neighbor good with metal can repair your broken hinge. You offer fresh eggs in return. Everyone's ledger is mental. Everyone remembers who owes whom, and everyone knows who breaks trust. Out here, reputation weighs more than silver. When it rains, you patch the roof with more bark and resin. When snow falls, and yes, it does in these parts, you insulate the cracks with moss. You wake with frost on your blanket. You feed the fire before you feed yourself. And through it all, your home grows, not in size, but in depth. A second shelf, a rocking chair, a peg for your hat. You know every creak of the floorboards, every nail that's loose, every place the wind sneaks in. This cabin, built by your own 2 hands, becomes more than shelter. It becomes your world, your workshop, your protector, your anchor. And when you step outside at dusk and look back at the rough-hewn walls glowing in the firelight, you don't see the flaws anymore. You see a monument to your will, a place where survival has become a kind of quiet mastery, a place no one gave you, a place you earned. The forest is no longer just the thing you clear. It's the thing you read. You wake early one morning, boots crunching softly through dew-soaked leaves, and notice the trails you once passed without thought now feel familiar. You recognize where the deer bed down by the bent willow, where wild turkey leave their crooked tracks near the dry creek bed, and where the blackberry vines grow thick in the spring. You no longer walk through the woods like a stranger. You walk like someone being watched. And strangely, that no longer bothers you. Not far from your cabin runs an old trail. It weaves through the trees with a deliberate grace that no animal would leave. Locals call it the Cherokee Trace, a path worn long before your boots ever touched Texas soil. It was carved by feet of people who knew the land far better than any settler ever would. They moved with the seasons, with the stars, with a rhythm your farming calendar can't match. And sometimes, if you're walking at dusk and the air is still, you swear you can hear that rhythm in the breeze. The Cherokee aren't often seen now. After their forced removal in 1839, their presence here became a whisper instead of a fact. But every once in a while, someone finds an arrowhead in a field, or hears of a campfire spotted in a distant hollow. You keep your head down and your rifle unloaded, not out of fear, but out of quiet respect. These woods were never yours. You're just borrowing them. Historians still argue whether the Cherokee who stayed behind simply blended into the wilderness or whether they kept hidden, waiting for a safer time to return. What is certain is that their knowledge never left. You see it in the way your neighbor boils willow bark for fever, or how you've started hanging bundles of sweetgrass above the door to keep insects out. You didn't invent that. Someone else taught someone else a long time ago, and now it's yours. You start to notice the forest has moods. When the wind shifts through the pines just right, it makes a sound like a wave crashing. When the sun cuts through at just the right angle, dust motes turn golden and hang in the air like ghosts. And when it rains, the smell rises from the ground with a force that feels ancient and earthy and clean. Game is everywhere. Squirrels chatter angrily above your head while you fish from the creek. You catch more catfish than you can eat and dry the rest on a rack above the fire. Wild hogs root at the edge of your clearing at night, their eyes glowing when caught in firelight. You set traps now, old metal jaws greased with bacon fat. You check them at dawn, hoping for meat, dreading a raccoon. Raccoons are smart, too smart. One of them has figured out how to spring the trap without getting caught. You call him the professor. You hate him, but also you respect him. Deer are harder to get. You spend days stalking a single buck. You move slow like a shadow, learning to breathe with the trees. You follow scat, disturbed leaves, broken twigs. You crouch in brush for hours, motionless, until your legs go numb. When the shot finally comes, it's quick. A single crack, an echo across the valley, and the forest holds its breath. You dress the deer carefully, thanking it, in a whisper you don't even fully understand. The meat will feed you for weeks. The hide will become a coat. The sinew, bowstrings. Nothing goes to waste. There's one night when the woods feel wrong, still. You step outside and even the insects have gone quiet. You scan the tree line, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed. Then a flicker of movement. Not animal, too smooth. You call out, but no reply. You don't sleep much that night. In the morning, you find your chicken coop door unlatched. Not broken, not clawed, just open. 3 chickens gone. One feather trail leading off into the woods and disappearing at the dry creek bed. Could have been an animal, could have been something else. Either way, you reinforce the coop with barbed branches. You hang bells near the door. Not everything in the forest is explained. One neighbor tells you about a creature he saw, a man with glowing eyes and no shadow, standing by the river and humming a song no one knows. Another says he saw lights dancing in the trees, far from any fire, too high to be lanterns. You nod and don't laugh. You've lived here long enough to know the forest doesn't care if you believe. You gather herbs now, yarrow, mullein, sassafras root. You dry them on racks in the sun, crumbling them into jars made from leftover oil tins and cracked clay. When someone gets sick, you boil them into bitter teas. They work more often than they don't. One evening, you find a mark carved in a tree. It's not your mark. It's not any neighbor's mark. Just a simple spiral, shallow and old. You stare at it for a long time. The tree is still healthy, still standing tall, but something about that spiral lingers in your head longer than you'd like. You don't mention it to anyone. There's a cave near the north edge of your land. More of a hollow, really. You found it while chasing a squirrel, of all things. Inside, the walls are blackened by fire and the ceiling stained with soot. Someone lived here, long ago. You find a broken pipe stem, a circle of stones, and the remains of a rabbit skull. You don't disturb it. You step back slowly and let the cave keep its silence. Back at your cabin, the wind picks up. You sit on the stoop, carving a spoon from walnut wood, and listen to the forest speak in its 1,000 voices. Leaves, branches, birds, insects, all at once. It's not music, It's not noise. It's just life. And it's yours now. The day you first hear about Captain Hart, the wind is high and the sky is spitting rain. You're standing outside your cabin, patching a hole in the roof with a bundle of pine bark, when your neighbor rides up on a tired mule, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He's got that look settlers get when something new is happening, something big enough to interrupt the rhythm of wood cutting and livestock and weather watching. He says there's a man setting up north of the trace, building a real house. Not a cabin, a house with windows. That man is Captain William Hart. You walk north the next morning, boots heavy in the mud. The forest thins out into what looks like the beginning of a clearing. It's not natural. Someone has pushed the trees back, shaped the land just enough to make space. And in the middle of that space stands a log home that's a little straighter, a little tighter, and somehow a little prouder than anything you've built. Smoke curls from the chimney. The windows have shutters that close flush. You see barrels stacked neatly by the wall, a hand-dug well, and a pen with a pair of bleeding goats. Captain Hart steps out onto the porch with a slow, measured nod. He's got the weathered face of someone who's seen too many sunrises and not enough peace. He offers you a seat and a tin cup of warm water. It's the best thing you've tasted all week. Turns out, he came from Tennessee. He's a surveyor by trade, a soldier by necessity. Says the Cherokee hired him once to map the trace, back when they still walked it freely. He doesn't smile when he says it. You get the feeling he's lost more than he lets on. But he doesn't act like a man who's here to hide. He's here to build. Historians note that Hart's home was among the first real hubs of community in this region, not just a shelter, but a center. Before there was any courthouse or county, there was Hart's house. It became the meeting place, the mail stop, the supply depot. If you needed to know something or find someone, you went to Hart's. Even the early judges held court there for a time, the law passed down beside the hearth, with chicken scratching nearby and stew boiling in the fireplace. You stay for supper, bread baked on a stone, boiled greens, and smoked pork from a pit out back. It's better than what you're used to. It tastes like memory, like effort made permanent. Hart's wife, Eveline, moves quietly through the room, efficient and kind. She's not what you expected in a place like this. Clean apron, sharp eyes, not a complaint in sight. You wonder what she left behind to follow her husband into the woods. After dinner, Hart lights a lantern and pulls out a thick book with names and numbers. It's a ledger, filled with records of who's claimed what land, who's passed through, who's been born, and who's died. There's no official register yet, but he keeps it anyway. The man likes order. It comforts him, and it gives the settler something to hold on to. In a world with no roads, no laws, and no map, Hart's book is the closest thing to truth anyone has. You help him for a week, hauling lumber, digging fence posts, clearing brush. Other settlers drift in, asking questions, offering help, trading meat for tools or news for coffee grounds. You see something forming, not just cabins in the woods, but a rhythm, a center of gravity, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this patch of forest could become more than survival. One morning, a man rides in from the east, shouting that more families are on the way and that there's talk in Austin of dividing up the land into new counties. That gets Hart's attention. He sets aside his shovel and says, "We better make sure they spell our names right when they draw those lines." You chuckle, but he's not joking. He's seen how borders get drawn and redrawn, how land slips from one jurisdiction to another like water through fingers. He wants permanence. He wants identity. And he wants this place to have a name. You help build a signpost. It's just a split log nailed between two trees with a word burned into it with a hot iron. Gilmer. Hart says it's for Thomas Gilmer, the Navy secretary who died in an explosion on a ship called the Princeton. You don't know much about that, but it sounds dramatic enough to warrant a name. The sign doesn't last long. The rain warps it, the sun fades it, a raccoon knocks it down in the night. But the name sticks, and people start using it when they talk about where they're from. Not just the clearing, not just near the trace, from Gilmer. On your last evening before heading back to your own land, you sit by Hart's fire while he sharpens a knife. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's deliberate. He tells you this land will grow faster than anyone's ready for, that the trees will fall and the roads will stretch and the children will forget what it felt like to walk all day without seeing another soul. He doesn't say it with regret, just an awareness. When you leave, he presses a small piece of parchment into your hand. It's a rough map. Trails, creeks, 3 cabins marked with tiny X's. Yours is one of them, so is his. You don't ask how he knew where to find you. He's a surveyor. That's his job. You tuck the map into your coat. As you walk back through the woods, it feels different than before. Not because the trees have changed, because now they're part of something bigger. A community is beginning. You can feel it. You helped shape it. And deep in your chest, under the layers of sweat and pine dust, you start to believe something new. Maybe this forest isn't the end of the world after all. Maybe it's the beginning.
The law, when it first arrives in these woods, doesn't come with a robe or a gavel or a building with pillars. It comes with a tree, a great towering oak near the bend in the Cherokee Trace, its limbs wide enough to shade a dozen men and its roots wrapped deep around the bones of the land. You stand under it one summer morning, the sun pushing through the leaves in patches of gold, and you witness justice being done the only way these early settlers know how, out loud, in the open, and with every eye watching. There's no courthouse yet, no jail, not even a sheriff's office. Just a few dozen settlers, a man accused of stealing a mule, and a traveling judge with a spine made of old rope and pine knots. The judge stands on a stump. The accused stands beside him, sweating in the heat. You and the rest of the community stand in a rough circle around the tree, arms crossed, waiting to hear what happens next. The evidence is thin. A rope, a hoof print, a witness who says maybe he saw something. The accused swears he borrowed the mule with the intent to return it. The owner swears otherwise. The crowd shifts and murmurs. The judge listens to both sides, his face unreadable, then turns and asks the crowd what they think. This, you realize, is the court. Not just the man on the stump, but all of you. Justice here is not sealed behind doors or filtered through paperwork. It is decided by people who still smell of smoke and sweat, who know each other's children, who shared meat and borrowed tools and watched each other bury kin. This is law rooted in survival. If a man steals, he's not just taking property, he's threatening the fragile trust that keeps everyone afloat. The vote is quiet but clear. The mule goes back to its owner. The accused is fined 2 bushels of corn and publicly warned. He nods and takes it. No shouting, no fight, just a lesson learned under the canopy of leaves. You hear later that this kind of justice wasn't uncommon. Historians still argue whether these early tree courts were effective or just theatrical. Some say they prevented chaos. Others say they disguised mob rule in the language of community. But whatever they were, they filled the void until real structures could rise. You see more cases in the weeks to come: a fence dispute, a drunken brawl, a fight over land where 2 property lines meet in the same patch of pine. Each one settled under the same oak, each time with new faces and fresh arguments. The judge is replaced sometimes. One dies of fever, another moves west, but the oak remains. One afternoon, a woman arrives, barefoot and furious. She says her neighbor's pigs tore through her garden. The neighbor says the garden was planted on the wrong side of the creek. Voices rise, accusations fly, then silence as everyone looks to the tree. That day, the judge is Captain Hart himself. He listens, then walks the 2 miles to the disputed land, trailing a small procession behind him like some forest king. He squints at the creek. He checks a tree with a carving older than your cabin. Then he nods. Says the garden stays. Says the pigs stay penned. Case closed. You catch yourself nodding, too. By now, a kind of ritual has formed. Court under the oak happens twice a month, more if trouble brews. Someone brings a stool, another hangs a lantern when it goes past dark. Families gather early, bringing baskets of food. Children play in the brush while their parents watch the proceedings. Sometimes someone reads a verse from the Bible. Sometimes someone sings. Sometimes people cry. The tree holds it all. One evening, you stand under the oak long after everyone else has gone. You run your hand along the bark. It's smooth in places from where people lean, knotty in others, with initials carved deep by pocket knives. You find yours. You smile. It's already starting to fade. The law begins to change. A new order from Austin says all counties must have official courthouses. A traveling representative visits Gilmer, or what passes for Gilmer, and declares it eligible for incorporation. Land is surveyed, streets are marked with chalk and hope. And finally, a crude wooden building goes up near the center of town. The first official courthouse. It's nothing more than a square cabin with a roof and 2 rooms, but it has a door, a sign, and papers nailed to the wall. The judge sits at a desk. The accused stand behind a rope. It smells like sweat and ink and sawdust. And it works. Mostly. But the tree still stands. Some folks say they trust it more than the new building. They meet under it anyway. They tell stories, pass news, settle small things. The big cases move to the courthouse, but the tree remains the place where rumors start and deals are made with a handshake. One year, lightning strikes the oak. A branch falls, splinters across the old stump where the judge used to stand. People whispered that it's a sign, a reminder that law, no matter how carefully constructed, is always one storm away from chaos. You help patch the roof on the courthouse that week. Rain leaks through the north corner. You spread pine tar and hope it holds. It's better than nothing. A traveler once told you that in Rome, justice wore a blindfold. Out here, justice wears boots and listens to both sides before deciding who brings the better cornbread to the next gathering. You wonder which version is better. You stand beneath the old oak again, years later. The bark has healed in places. The initials are older now, faded to near invisibility. You remember the mule, the pigs, the neighbor who cried when her fence was fixed. You remember the hush that always followed a verdict, the nods, the reluctant forgiveness. Law didn't come to this place with paper. It came with people. It came with trees. And deep in the soil under your feet, the memory of those first rulings still lingers.
By now, you've grown used to the rhythm of the woods, the steady hum of insects in summer, the thud of your axe splitting cedar. The lazy way smoke curls from cabin chimneys in the cool of dawn. But change doesn't ask permission. It arrives like floodwater, fast, muddy, and impossible to ignore. You first hear about the storm from a rider tearing down the trail like his horse is on fire. He shouts something about the river, about the town, about the water rising faster than anyone expected. You drop your tools and run, heart thudding, eyes scanning the sky. The clouds are low and gray. The air smells like iron and panic. When you reach Gilmer, the Gilmer you know, the one settled carefully near Little Cypress Creek, the streets are already half submerged. Barrels float past the general store. Chickens cling to the rafters of the church. Someone's washboard bobs in the current like a doomed raft, and standing knee-deep in it all is the town's newest judge, shaking his fist at the sky like that's going to help. The flood changes everything. For days, you and the others haul what you can to higher ground. Crates of books, sacks of flour, children perched in wheelbarrows. The town's only piano, lifted like it's made of feathers and dreams. Horses slip. Women pray. The water doesn't care. It just keeps coming. When the creek finally retreats, it leaves behind a soggy mess. Mud-caked walls, ruined ledgers, chickens that refuse to lay, and the smell, like damp wood and regret. You look around at the wreckage and wonder, maybe building a town in a floodplain wasn't the best idea. You're not the only one. In the weeks that follow, the conversations begin. Quiet at first, just murmurs by the fire, then louder, sharper. Arguments over where the town should be rebuilt. Some say stay put and raise the foundations. Others insist on moving the entire town uphill to a rise near the old stagecoach trail. Historians still argue whether this debate was driven more by practicality or politics, but at the time, it feels like life or death. Captain Hart, older now, but still sharp-eyed and respected, speaks at the meeting held under the big sycamore. He says Gilmer can't afford to drown again. The soil uphill is firm, the breeze cleaner, the ground dry. He says what everyone is thinking but afraid to say out loud. It's time to move. There's resistance, of course. The store owners hate the idea of losing their foot traffic. The preacher insists God will protect the original spot. A few folks muttered that if you keep moving every time something bad happens, you'll spend your life running. But in the end, the vote is cast. Gilmer will move south. Not everyone packs up immediately. Some stay behind, clinging to what they know. But you're ready. You load your wagon with what you can carry. 2 chairs, a chipped basin, a bundle of dried meat, and your mother's sewing box. You hitch up the mule and head uphill. The new site isn't much yet, just a wide patch of meadow dotted with tree stumps and possibilities. You pitch a tent, you dig a well, and you build again. This time, though, you don't build alone. All around you, neighbors are doing the same. Raising walls, hammering beams, arguing over who gets the shady spots. There's laughter, too. The kind that comes from shared exhaustion and fresh starts. A week later, the songgle arrives. It's not much, just a hand-cranked beast with the whining blade and a fondness for jamming, but it's enough to turn logs into boards, and boards into buildings. The new Gilmar begins to rise, straighter, sturdier, and drier. The courthouse is rebuilt with taller stilts. The church gets a steeple this time. The store opens with a new sign. Same goods, less flood. One evening, you climb the small hill that overlooks the whole site. You watch the roofs glint in the fading sun, smoke rising from chimneys, children running barefoot between piles of lumber. There's a strange silence to it, peaceful and proud. Then someone fires a rifle by accident and a goat screams, and you remember, it's still Gilmer. News spreads quickly. Travelers begin to mark the new town on their maps, mail delivery adjusts, a stagecoach line reroutes. A few folks even suggest drawing up an official town charter. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds important. A year passes. The old town, now nicknamed Mud Bottom, becomes a ghost. The church sags into the earth. Ivy claims the schoolhouse. Only the most stubborn souls remain, muttering about the good old days as they bail water from their porches. One day, you return to Mud Bottom, just for a look. You find your old path nearly overgrown. The cabin still stands, leaning like a tired man. You step inside, run your fingers along the familiar door frame. The air smells of mold and memory. You smile, then shut the door gently behind you. Back in the new Gilmer, things feel settled. There's a festival in the fall, complete with fiddle music, roasted corn, and a pie-eating contest that ends in mild disaster and 3 days of indigestion for the winter. A schoolhouse opens with a chalkboard and a teacher who claims she once met Sam Houston. I don't believe her, but the kids do, and that's enough. The oak tree, where justice was once dispensed, still stands, but now it's just a tree. A good place for shade and sandwiches. The law lives in a building now. The town lives on a hill. And you've survived a flood, a relocation, and more than one argument about how to spell y'all. You sit on your new porch as twilight drapes over the rooftops. You sip from a tin cup and listen to the sounds of a town remade. Dogs barking, hammers ringing, someone singing off-key. And somewhere deep in your chest, you feel it. This is home.
It begins with a hum, faint at first, like the low murmur of insects deep in the forest. But then it sharpens into something rhythmic, predictable, unnatural, a mechanical drone that grows louder each day. You step out of your cabin one morning and realize the forest no longer sounds like it used to. The wind still rustles the pines, birds still chatter at dawn, but beneath it all, there's a constant thrum, the sound of saws biting into timber. At first, it's just one, a small water-powered mill down by Big Sandy Creek. The man who builds it says he got the idea from a trip up north, where mills chew through trees like locusts through a field. Here, he's starting small, a dozen logs a day, maybe 15 if the water runs strong. You don't think much of it at first. In fact, you're grateful. The planks save you days of labor. No more hand-splitting shingles or shaping beams with a broadaxe until your arms go numb. But then another mill opens, and then another. By the time the third one starts humming, it's clear the trees aren't just shelter anymore, they're currency. People no longer talk about acres for farming. They talk about board feet and timber rights. Land changes hands not for what it can grow, but for how tall and straight its pines stand. You walk past piles of logs stripped of bark, stacked like bones along the edge of town. Children play hide and seek among them, unaware that these trees once shaded deer paths and cooled creeks and marked the quiet corners of the world. Now they're just raw material waiting to be fed into the saw. You see men arrive from further out, strangers with rough hands and quick eyes. They come for work and they get it. The mills run day and night, belts squealing, saws whining, steam hissing like angry spirits. Gilmer, once a sleepy cluster of cabins, begins to sound like progress. Historians agree that the arrival of the lumber industry marked a turning point for this region. Some call it the birth of true industry in East Texas. Others argue it was the beginning of the forest's end. Either way, everything changes. You get a job at the mill for a spell. It's loud, dirty work. You wear cotton in your ears to muffle the noise. Your clothes come home stiff with sawdust, but the pay is better than trapping and your back thanks you. Still, each night you lie awake hearing the blades spin in your dreams. The town swells. New buildings go up fast. Lumberyards, boarding houses, taverns where workers gather to drink and swap tall tales about snakes in the rafters and ghosts in the old cut. A new blacksmith arrives, followed by a barber who cuts hair for 2 cents and tells you all about his cousin's circus career. You don't ask questions. The sawmill owners get rich, really rich. One of them builds a house with glass windows on all 4 sides and a second story, a luxury so outrageous people ride in from neighboring counties just to stare at it. They call it the Crystal Barn, which is both accurate and slightly ridiculous. You stay modest. Your cabin is still mostly your own work with a few planks courtesy of the mill.
You add a second room, build a proper porch, plant some honeysuckle. It's not fancy, but it's home. Then the clear cutting starts. It begins at the edges, far enough out that you only notice when the deer don't return in winter, when the creek runs warm and sluggish, when the breeze carries more dust than scent. But soon the cuts creep closer. Whole hillsides vanish. You climb to your favorite overlook one evening and find the view has changed. Where once there was endless green, now there's stumps and burn piles and muddy ruts like wounds in the land. You ask an old trapper what he thinks. He spits into the dust and says, "We're eating the forest like a pie, and we forgot to leave a slice." Still, no one stops. The mills expand. A new machine arrives. Steam-powered, they say. Cuts faster, cleaner, deadlier. It takes 6 men to run it and 1 mistake to lose a hand. You hear stories. You see bandaged stumps. You learn to keep your distance. But it's not all bad. With the lumber comes money. With money comes schools, shops, and a strange little place that sells only books. You walk in one day and see a shelf labeled Natural Philosophy. You don't know what that means, but the cover has a picture of a volcano and you buy it anyway. Gilmer hosts its first town fair. There's a tent with fiddle music, a man selling sweet pies, and another showing off a mechanical corn sheller that works half the time and explodes the other half. You laugh until you nearly choke on cider. Evenings still bring peace. The stars still blink above. Owls still call from the dark edges of what remains. But the quiet is different now. Less wild. More measured, like the forest is holding its breath. One day a young boy approaches you as you sit on your porch. He's holding a pine cone and asks if you know what kind of tree it came from. You tell him it's a longleaf, that it once stood taller than the church steeple and smelled of resin and rain. He says he's never seen one. You look out across the land and realize neither have you, not in months. You tell him about the days before the sawmills, when the only sounds were birds and axes and the hush of wind through branches. He listens, wide-eyed. Then he asks if he can come back tomorrow and hear more. You nod. You've never been a teacher. But maybe, just maybe, it's time someone remembers.
By now, you've grown comfortable with calloused hands and splinters under your nails. You've built cabins, raised fences, cleared brush, and drag logs heavier than your regrets. But there's one thing out here you can't chop, or carve, or dig from the earth: knowledge. And it's becoming clear that if this community wants a future beyond sawdust and cornfields, somebody's gonna have to figure out how to teach the next generation to do more than swing an axe or mend a harness. At first, it's just a thought whispered over supper, or muttered during church. Maybe the children ought to be learning their letters. Maybe the good book shouldn't be the only thing folks can read. Maybe there's more to this life than just surviving the woods. So you gather, not all at once, and not without a little suspicion, because if there's one thing people out here know how to mistrust, it's anything that smells like city ideas. But eventually, a group forms. Farmers, preachers, mill hands, women with sharp eyes and sharper opinions, and you, leaning back in your chair, wondering how in the world you ended up on a committee. The first plan is simple: 1 room, 4 walls, and someone who knows their alphabet better than the rest of you. A schoolhouse. Doesn't even need desks. Just logs to sit on and a slate to write on. It sounds easy until you try to decide who's gonna teach. You go through the list. The preacher's wife? She can read, but has the patience of a cornered possum. Old Mr. Taggart? Knows Latin, but smells like vinegar and raccoons. Miss Evers? She's quiet, steady, and can spell philosophy without blinking.
You vote. She wins. Everyone exhales. The school goes up behind the church. You help raise the frame, hammer shingles, and carve initials into the beam over the doorway because, let's be honest, you still have a bit of child in you. When it's done, you stand back and feel something shift, not in the soil, but in your chest. This is different. This is planting seeds that won't bloom for years. On the first day, 10 children show up, barefoot, jittery, some carrying leftover biscuits in their pockets. Miss Evers greets them with a smile and a chalkboard so new it squeaks. She starts with the alphabet. A is for apple. B is for Bible. C is for consequences, she adds with a wink. You watch from outside, pretending you're fixing the doorframe. And then the Murray Institute arrives. Now, you've heard of it in passing, a strange little school with big ideas, started by a preacher named J.C. Murray, who believed even frontier children deserved the kind of education that might actually lead somewhere. Not just reading and writing, but history, science, mathematics, even music. Murray wasn't from around here. That much is obvious from the way he talks, and the fact that he wears shoes even when it's not Sunday. But the man has vision. And more importantly, he has books, crates of them, big ones with complicated words and pictures of places most folks here have never heard of. He sets up shop in a 2-room building with a tin roof and calls it a seminary, which sounds suspiciously fancy. But curiosity is a stubborn weed, and soon the rooms are full. You sit in on a lecture one afternoon just to see what all the fuss is about. Murray is up front, holding a globe like it's made of gold. He spins it, points to Africa, to Asia, to places you thought were just made-up words. He talks about geography, then pivots to astronomy, then quotes Socrates like he's gossiping about a neighbor. You don't catch every word, but you catch enough to feel your brain stretch like a shirt that's been too long on the line. Historians still debate how much formal education mattered in these remote pockets of early Texas. Some argue it laid the foundation for civic growth. Others suggest it was more symbolic than practical, since many students only attended for a few seasons before heading back to the fields. But in Gilmer, you see the effects firsthand. Children stop carving initials into trees and start writing their names in cursive. People argue about history instead of hog prices. The preacher begins quoting Shakespeare, which you find both unsettling and oddly impressive. But there's resistance too. One man claims arithmetic is a tool of the devil. Another says education makes children lazy and disrespectful. There's even a rumor that books carry disease, started, conveniently, by a man whose son was caught sleeping in class. Still, the school endures. Like a sapling in rocky soil, it pushes upward. Murray's ideas spread. He trains local teachers, distributes books, and even dreams of starting a school for girls. A scandalous thought to some, a breath of fresh air to others. He believes, quite stubbornly, that education should not depend on gender, or bank account, or the size of your hat. And in time, people start to agree. Your own daughter begins attending. She comes home quoting Benjamin Franklin and asking questions you don't know how to answer. What is gravity, Papa? Why does the moon follow us? You bluff your way through some, then confess ignorance with pride. You're learning too. Slowly, awkwardly, but learning all the same. One afternoon, your daughter brings home a prize, a small book of poems. She reads them aloud by lamplight, stumbling over the big words, giggling through the odd phrases. You close your eyes and listen, and somewhere between the lines about stars and sorrow, you feel it again, that quiet tug of something larger than yourself. You helped build this, Not just the schoolhouse, but the idea that minds matter, that words can shape futures, that even in the heart of the woods, knowledge has a place. And you wonder what comes next. Maybe a library, maybe a college, maybe just a few more children learning how to ask better questions. Either way, the seed is planted, and it's already growing.
The first sign isn't a battle, it's a whisper. The kind that trails into town on the back of a traveler's breath, wrapped in confusion, tinged with urgency. A whisper about secession, about rebellion, about war. You hear it first while hauling a sack of cornmeal across the square. A man on horseback mutters to the blacksmith something about Fort Sumter, about South Carolina firing on the Union. You don't recognize the place, and you barely know what it means, but the blacksmith's hammer slows, and the whole street seems to hold its breath. It doesn't take long for the whisper to become a roar. Soon, the post office walls are covered in broadsides. Men in town are arguing under the oak tree instead of talking about the price of cattle. The preacher starts slipping mentions of duty and honor into his sermons. Flags you've never seen before start showing up on porches. People who used to talk about crops are now talking about Washington, Lincoln, Richmond. You watch your neighbors change. Boys who were helping raise cabins just a month ago are now drilling in the field behind the church. A few get actual uniforms. Most just wear what they have. Suspenders, boots, and the wild look of someone who wants to be brave but hasn't had to be yet. They take pride in marching in straight lines, holding wooden rifles, pretending they're ready. When the call for volunteers finally reaches Upshur County, they line up. Not just the boys, men too. Fathers, shopkeepers, sawyers. Some are pulled by ideology, others by pressure. Some just want to protect their land, even if they're not sure who it's from. You don't enlist, not because you're a coward. You've chopped down trees that could kill you with one wrong move, but someone needs to stay behind. Someone needs to keep the families fed, the children safe, the land working. Historians still debate how much East Texas believed in the cause they fought for. Some claim the area was always more loyal to its land than to any distant capital. Others argue that once the wheels of war turned, people were swept into it, whether they understood it or not. Either way, it comes. At first, there's no cannon fire here, no blue coats on the horizon, just silence. Long, eerie stretches of it, broken by the news from far away. Names like Bull Run and Antietam trickle in, carried on scraps of letters smudged with dust and grief. The letters don't say much, just enough. We marched, we waited, we fired. Some didn't get up. You keep the town running. You help a neighbor mend a roof, take a sack of flour to a widow, try not to notice how empty the school has become. Miss Evers teaches the children who remain, their eyes a little wider than they used to be. But the absences grow louder than the news. A mother stops coming to church. A wife folds her husband's coat and never opens the trunk again. A child asks if his papa's ever coming back and stares at you too long when you say, "We hope so." And then comes the fire. Not from war, but from a forge that spat one spark too far on a dry summer afternoon. It spreads fast, feeding on pine boards and sawdust. You run with the bucket. Everyone does. No one asks who owns what. You just form a line, pass the water, shout orders, hope. You save most of the town, but the schoolhouse roof is gone. The general store is blackened and half melted. A barn collapses with a crash that echoes like thunder. No one dies, but the damage settles in people's bones. It's one more burden in a season already overflowing with loss. Then something strange happens. A letter arrives, not from a soldier, but from a freedman. He writes from Louisiana,
says he once passed through Gilmer, remembers the way the trees looked at sunset. He heard there's work here, wants to bring his wife, maybe start over. You read it twice. Not everyone is ready for that idea. You hear men in town say ugly things, you see the looks, but you also see others, quiet, firm hands extended in greeting. And you realize the war didn't just change who lived and who died, it changed the questions people are willing to ask. When it ends, it's almost quiet. No parade, no sudden celebration, just a rider in the rain calling out that Lee surrendered, that it's over, that now comes the hard part. The boys come back different. Some hobble on makeshift crutches, some carry scars where limbs used to be, others return with faces you hardly recognize, thinner, older, eyes like locked doors. Some don't come back at all. A few of their names are carved into a plank nailed to the church wall. You help nail it. Life resumes, but it's like walking on ashes. You plan again. You rebuild. The sawmill groans back to life. A new school roof is raised. Babies are born. Laughter returns, slowly, hesitantly, as if joy is something fragile now. And yet, it grows. A traveling preacher visits town, says the war was God's pruning, that what was false has been burned away. You're not sure you agree, but you do see something new taking root in the way children now talk about maps and books, and how the town votes to rebuild the school bigger than before, in the quiet understanding shared between neighbors who once stood on opposite sides. You teach your daughter to plant corn with her hands and to read aloud with her heart. She asks questions, so many questions. You try to answer, even when you don't know, especially when you don't know. At night, you sit under the stars, the same stars that watched over you long before war came. You listen to the frogs, the wind, the small sigh of the earth trying to heal. You're still here, and so is hope.
The war leaves behind a silence deeper than any you'd heard in these woods before. It's not just the quiet of mourning or exhaustion. It's the hush of uncertainty. You walk through the square and notice the missing faces. The mill is slower, the church pews thinner. The schoolhouse, rebuilt but hollow feeling, echoes with fewer children. Yet in that silence, something begins to stir, a kind of soft, slow rebuilding. The fields are the first to return. Corn and cotton do not care who won or lost. They ask only for water, sun, and someone to pull the weeds. You wake each day before dawn like you used to, stretch your aching back, and return to the land. Your hands remember what they forgot during the long years of survival. But now, every furrow you dig feels like a kind of prayer, not just for food, but for peace, for continuity, for something like normal. Your neighbors come back to life too, slowly, tentatively. You help raise a barn for the Crawfords. You attend a wedding that feels more like a victory. You hear a baby's laugh and realize you hadn't heard that sound in months. These little things, a pie cooling on a windowsill, a rooster crowing, the creak of a porch swing, these are the first green shoots after the fire. But society is changing around you, whether you welcome it or not. Freedmen arrive in greater numbers now, families mostly, with quiet eyes and calloused palms. Some settle near the creeks, building small homes with whatever they can find. They form their own communities, their own churches. You see the children walking to school with slates tucked under their arms, heads held high. Some folks scoff, others glare, but many, like you, simply nod in quiet recognition. Life has opened a door that no one can close again. The old power structures creak like a loose wagon wheel. Men who once ruled by fear and name alone find their influence fading. New leaders emerge, not always polished, but more practical.
Elections become livelier, church meetings longer, and people start caring deeply about things they'd ignored before. Roads, schools, who gets a say in the future? You attend more town meetings now than you ever thought you would. You even speak up once, voice cracking, hand shaking, but you're heard. Historians still argue whether Reconstruction in places like Upshur County succeeded or failed. Some say it was too short, too shallow. Others argue it lit a slow-burning fuse that would change Texas forever. You don't think in those terms. You just see the changes. Slow, uneven, sometimes bitter, but undeniable. The Maury Institute reopens with more students than ever. Miss Evers now teaches alongside a young man from Austin, full of strange theories and long vowels. He talks about steam engines and celestial navigation. Your daughter comes home one day and explains to you what a comet is. You nod, though you still picture it as a glowing chicken flying through the heavens. You hear the word industry more often now. It used to be a vague thing, associated with cities far away. Now a man sets up a blacksmith shop next to the courthouse. Another opens a dry goods store with shelves of glass jars and bolts of cloth. You find yourself trading more than you make, paying in eggs, helping repair a roof in exchange for a pair of boots. It feels less lonely somehow. One day someone mentions a new word, telegraph. You don't fully understand it, but it sounds like magic. Messages flying faster than horses can carry them. You scoff at first. Then you see the wire strung between poles, marching across the horizon like some steel snake. A line is installed in Tyler. Gilmer won't be far behind. The community holds a 4th of July celebration like never before. Flags hang from doorways. Children run barefoot through the grass, chasing hoops and blowing whistles. You sit with your neighbors, black, white, tired, hopeful, and share cornbread and coffee. Someone plays a fiddle. Someone else reads from the Declaration of Independence, and no one interrupts. For a moment, everyone seems to believe again. But the pain hasn't vanished. It lingers in memories, in empty chairs, in the limp of a man who never quite healed. You still wake some nights, heart pounding from a dream you can't explain. You still think of names carved in rough headstones out past the old church. You still find yourself watching the woods too long, listening for something you can't name. Yet every day, something small shifts. You notice a child reading out loud on the porch, a woman hammering shingles on her own roof, a blacksmith teaching a former soldier how to shoe a horse, a former slave and a white farmer building a fence together. These moments aren't loud. They're not in the newspapers, but they're real. You begin to think less about what was and more about what might still be. Your daughter wants to teach, says she wants to help other girls find their voice. You nod and try not to cry in front of her. You give her your father's Bible, the one you kept hidden in the trunk all these years, and she holds it like it's a diploma. She walks to the Maury Institute with a satchel full of chalk and dreams. A new church goes up near the south end of town, built by freedmen with their own hands. You donate lumber and sit quietly in the back on opening day. The sermon is about healing. You don't understand every word, but you understand the feeling. One evening, you visit the graves again. You bring fresh flowers and a small rock from the riverbed where you used to fish with your brother. You whisper his name, and for once, you don't feel only sadness. You feel gratitude. You walk home slowly, the woods humming with frogs and crickets, the smell of pine thick in the air. You pass the rebuilt school, the busy general store, the barn you helped raise last spring. You nod at the stars, your old companions. Tomorrow will bring more work, more noise, more change. But tonight, you let yourself breathe. You survived the storm, and the forest is growing again.
You hear it before you see it, a deep, distant rumble that rolls over the hills like thunder, but steadier, more mechanical. Some say it sounds like a storm. Others say it sounds like the future. You set down your axe and listen. The sound comes again, rhythmic, heavy, alive. And then, finally, the truth of it appears in smoke and steel. The railroad has arrived. The tracks cut through the countryside like a scar of progress. Tall pines fall by the hundreds to clear the path. Teams of men sweat in the sun, hammering rails into wooden ties, the clink of iron echoing across the valleys. Some folks watch with awe, others with suspicion, but no one looks away. You remember walking to Tyler once, 20 miles of dust, heat, and sore feet. Now, this iron horse could make that same journey in a fraction of the time, hauling people, goods, and ideas faster than any wagon ever could. The county, once cradled in isolation, is about to wake up to the wider world. The first train that rolls into Gilmer is a spectacle. You and half the town gather near the new depot, dressed in your Sunday best, even though it's Wednesday. Children sit on their father's shoulders, women clutch parasols and whisper. And then it comes, a black beast, belching smoke, its whistle shrieking like Judgment Day. Your hat nearly flies off when it roars past. Dust kicks up, horses rear, someone drops their pie, but no one cares. You're all too busy staring at the marvel in front of you. It stops, hissing and clanging, and men begin unloading crates. Bolts of cloth, bags of coffee, tools, even a piano. One man steps off with a suitcase in the cane and introduces himself as a doctor. A real doctor. People gasp like someone just arrived from the moon. The railroad changes everything. Sawmills double their output, shipping lumber faster than ever before. Cotton leaves the fields and enters the national market. Stores begin stocking things you've only heard about in letters. Canned peaches from New York, shoes from Boston, even peppermint sticks wrapped in red and white paper. A newspaper prints an article titled, "Gilmer, the Heart of East Texas." You chuckle, but deep down you feel something swelling in your chest. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's just disbelief that your sleepy pioneer town now has a train schedule. New towns spring up along the tracks like mushrooms after rain. Betty, Simpsonville, Big Sandy, names that used to mean nothing and now show up on maps. People arrive from all over, some to settle, others just passing through. You hear accents you've never heard before, see faces you can't place. The town, once a tight-knit cabin circle in the woods, is becoming a crossroads. Historians still argue whether the railroad truly benefited everyone in East Texas. Some claim it brought corruption, class division, and chaos. Others say it rescued the region from isolation and poverty. You don't have the luxury of grand theories. All you know is that business is booming, letters arrive faster, and your cousin finally got his hands on a real harmonica. The train also brings news faster, broader, and more frequent. Politics from Washington, fashions from Paris, murder trials from Kansas. Some of it feels distant. Some of it hits close. When the panic of 1873 hits, you watch credit dry up, jobs vanish, and families leave town as quickly as they came. Even the train, once a symbol of unstoppable motion, begins to seem fragile. But Gilmer endures. You adapt. You always have. You open your first bank account, though the paperwork nearly drives you to drink. You help install a water pump near the courthouse, marveling that you no longer have to walk to the creek. You watch your neighbors install lighting rods, paint their houses, and subscribe to magazines with names like Ladies' Home Companion and Scientific American. And yet, for all the change, some things remain. The forest still rustles with the same winds. The stars still blink in the same ancient patterns. You still wake early, stretch your limbs, and drink your coffee by the fire before the sun crests the hills. But now, when you step outside, you don't just see a cabin and a fence. You see telephone poles rising like bare trees. You see fences stretching farther than before. You see the town square bustling with wagons, children, and men in suits who talk about stocks. Your daughter, now grown, returns from her first trip to Dallas with a suitcase full of nonsense. A gramophone, a corset, a book of poetry you can't pronounce. She plays a record for you, scratchy music with a strange rhythm, and dances in the kitchen until you laugh so hard you spill your tea. She tells you she wants to open a school for girls. Not just reading and writing, but science, math, even astronomy. You raise an eyebrow. She raises both. You nod. Of course she will. The forest is thinner now. Not gone, but changed. Paths have become roads. Cabins have become homes. You walk past places where you once hunted deer and now see rows of houses with porches and rocking chairs. You feel nostalgic, sure, but also grateful. You lived through the hardest parts. You saw the seed, and now you're watching it bear fruit. You still visit the depot sometimes, just to watch the trains go by. They don't startle you anymore. You wave at the engineers. Sometimes they wave back. Once a stranger hops off and asks for directions. You point the way and realize you gave those same directions to someone 20 years ago, only then it was all trees. As the sun dips behind the hills, you sit on a bench near the tracks, a tin of tobacco in your pocket, your boots dusty. The whistle of the train fades into the distance, replaced by the hum of cicadas and the soft, familiar rustle of leaves. And you smile, because the railroad didn't just change Gilmer, it changed you.
It starts with a sputter, then a cough, then, to everyone's disbelief, a mechanical roar unlike anything you've ever heard. You drop your plow mid-row and look up, squinting toward the road. Dust curls into the sky. Chickens scatter. Children shriek. A cow stares, unbothered. And then it appears, a boxy contraption with no horses, no reins, and wheels spinning like madness. The first automobile has arrived in Gilmer. You laugh out loud. It sounds like something from a tall tale, like a mechanical bull that someone tricked into pulling a wagon. But it's real, made of steel and brass and more gears than you can count. The driver wears goggles and a scarf, like he's preparing to wrestle a tornado. He honks a horn that sounds like a dying goose. You've never seen anything so ridiculous, so pointless, and so thrilling. The townsfolk gather around. Children reach out to touch the rubber tires. A man bets $1 it'll never make it up the hill toward the courthouse. Another offers to race it with his mule, and someone quietly mutters that the devil must be involved. You don't say much, but you stare at that sputtering machine like it just whispered a secret from the future. Over the next year, 2 more cars appear. One is a sleek black Ford that looks like a sewing machine mated with a wash tub. The other breaks down twice before it even reaches town, but still, they keep coming. Slowly, surely, they grow more common. The sound of hooves and wagon wheels doesn't vanish overnight, but it begins to share space with the coughing, growling chorus of combustion engines. You see change in other ways, too. The roads begin to improve, out of necessity more than pride. No longer just dirt ruts worn by wagon wheels, they start to get flattened, graded, even graveled. The town raises money for a bridge over the creek so that cars don't drown like the last one did. Sidewalks appear. Lamp posts are installed. At night, the streets of Gilmer glow with a flickering electric light as if the stars decided to visit the ground. It's disorienting, this new pace of life. Time used to be marked by sunrises and seasons. Now it's counted by timetables, telephones, and train departures. You buy your first wristwatch from a traveling salesman. It ticks with a certainty you no longer trust. You miss the silence, the long gaps between things, the ability to pause without guilt. Your neighbors begin speaking in terms of progress. It's the new gospel. Better, faster, newer. That's what matters now. The blacksmith turns into a mechanic. The general store becomes a department store. A man starts selling typewriters out of a wagon, demonstrating how you can write a full letter in minutes without ever dipping a pen in ink. Historians still debate whether the automobile truly marked the end of the pioneer era in places like Upshur County. Some argue it merely evolved the frontier spirit, from walking behind a plow to riding behind a wheel. Others say it broke something sacred, the tie between human and land. You live in the middle of that tension, proud of the future, but nostalgic for the past. You tried driving once.
A neighbor offers you a spin around the square in his gleaming new Model T. You grip the wheel like a snake might jump out of it. The machine bucks and lurches. Your hat flies off. You nearly drive into a chicken coop. But when you finally stop, laughing and breathless, you admit it felt like flying. Still, you keep your wagon. It's dependable, familiar. You trust your mule more than anything built with spark plugs. But even you know the world is moving on, with or without you. Your daughter, ever the modern one, learns to type. Says she might apply to work for the local newspaper. Your neighbor strings up a radio antenna and claims he can hear voices from Chicago. At night, you hear music drifting through open windows. Jazz, they call it. Fast, brassy, a little wild. It's the sound of a generation raised on speed. One day, a boy races past your house on a bicycle with tires thinner than your wrist. He doesn't wave. He's moving too fast. You remember when the road he's on was barely more than a deer trail. Now it leads to stores, schools, and dreams you can't begin to name. But not everything disappears. You still sit on your porch most evenings, a warm mug in hand, listening to the wind hum through the trees. You still chop wood, still mend fences, still smell the first rain before it hits. You still plant your garden by moonlight and your instinct. Some things don't need improvement. They just need attention. The town holds a parade to celebrate Progress Day. You attend, standing among the crowd as Model Ts roll by, followed by tractors, bicycles, and finally, a float shaped like a rocket. Children cheer, grown men grin. You feel a strange mix of pride and dislocation. Because this isn't the world you built with your axe and your sweat, but it is the world your labor made possible. You helped clear the woods, raise the schools, rode in the mares, and build the churches. You survived the storms, the wars, the years of doubt. You endured. And now from those same roots, something faster, louder, and stranger has grown. One evening, your granddaughter climbs into your lap and asks what the world was like when you were her age. You tell her about the forest, the cabin, the axe, the long walks. She listens with wide eyes, as if you're recounting a myth. She says she wants to be an inventor, maybe build a car that flies. You smile. Of course she does. And as the last light of day glows on the road outside, you hear a distant sputter and watch another automobile rumble past. Part miracle, part machine, part memory.
The first time someone mentions oil, you think they're talking about lamp oil. Maybe something for cleaning wounds or greasing wagon wheels. But no, they mean oil from the earth, black and bubbling and thick as molasses. It sounds ridiculous, until one day, it isn't. You're hoeing the edge of your cornfield when a neighbor barrels down the path on horseback, shouting like he's seen fire rain from the sky. You follow him past the old pine stands, toward the hills where no one builds much of anything, and there it is. A well, a derrick, a pipe, and a spray of dark liquid shooting up into the air like the earth itself just sneezed. They call it a gusher. You can smell it before you see it. Sharp, smoky, and strange. The men around it are soaked, cheering and sliding in the black mud like children at a fair. One of them wipes his face and grins like he's found gold. And in a way, he has. Oil changes the conversation. You hear it in the general store, in church foyers, even at funerals. Land that once seemed worthless is now divided, surveyed, and suddenly valuable. Folks who could barely afford shoes last week are wearing pocket watches this week. People who never said a word about geology are now experts on shale, salt domes, and mineral rights. A man comes to town in a suit so fine it looks like it cost more than your entire house. He carries papers, speaks with a northern accent, and offers to buy land leases for what seems like ridiculous money. Some folks sign on the spot. Others hold out. You don't know what to think, but curiosity wins. You lease a corner of your pasture, the rocky part you could never plow. A few weeks later, a drilling team arrives. They speak fast, smoke cigars, and work all night. The derrick rises like a wooden skeleton against the sky. The noise is constant. The smell clings to your clothes. And then one day, your land spits up black gold. You don't scream. You don't dance. You just sit on your porch that night, staring at your boots, wondering what it all means. Because it's not just about money. It's about change. Again. The quiet hills of Upshur County are no longer just timberland and farms. They're now part of something bigger, the Texas oil boom. More rigs appear. More roads are carved. More people arrive, drawn like moths to the flame of fortune. Some stay, many don't. Some strike it rich. Others strike rock and curse the sky. Historians still debate whether the oil boom brought more harm than good. It created wealth, yes, but also greed, corruption, and environmental ruin. The forests retreat faster, the streams run darker. The once sleepy hills now thrum with diesel and ambition. The town tries to keep up. Banks expand, new hotels rise, saloons multiply like rabbits. You see things in Gilmer you never expected. Jazz bands, telephones, men in shiny cars with names like Packard and Buick. You see women wearing hats so wide they could block the sun and skirts that barely brush their knees. Your granddaughter calls it modern. You call it startling. Still, it's hard not to be impressed. The roads are paved now. The school has electric lights. A hospital opens on the edge of town. And you, once a boy who lived in a tree cabin, now receive checks in the mail that you don't fully understand. Royalties, they say. Passive income. You feel like you're being paid to exist. It's strange, but not unwelcome. You don't spend lavishly. You buy new boots, a proper coat, a rocking chair for the porch. You fix the roof and put in glass windows instead of shutters. Your granddaughter uses some of it to start her school. Your grandson talks about college like it's a normal thing. You nod, even though you never finished formal school yourself. You still farm, still chop wood, still trust the rhythm of the seasons. But now you do it knowing there's a bit of breathing room, a cushion, a little safety in a world that once offered none. One Sunday, a preacher gives a fiery sermon about greed. He warns of losing one's soul in the pursuit of black gold. He speaks of Sodom and Gomorrah and uses words like temptation and decay. You sit quietly, hat in your lap, and wonder if he's right or if he's just scared, or both. Because the oil boom hasn't just changed the land, it's changed people. Some neighbors build grand houses with columns and parlors. Others gamble their earnings away in backroom games. A few leave entirely, chasing bigger dreams in Houston or Dallas or farther still. You find yourself feeling both proud and uneasy, as if you planted a tree and it turned into a machine overnight. Your granddaughter visits one day with a newspaper from Tyler. The front page shows an oil rig silhouetted against the sunrise, titled Upshur County's New Era. She reads it aloud while you sip coffee. The words sound grand, almost biblical. You smile but say nothing. That night, you walk the property, past the barn, past the derrick. You place a hand on the cool metal and listen to it hum. The stars above still shine the way they always have. The frogs still sing. But the land feels different. Not worse, just changed. You return to the porch and sit in your new rocking chair. It creaks like the old one. The wind brushes your face. You hear a car in the distance, followed by the low rumble of another rig firing up. You close your eyes. It's not the world you started with, but it's the one you helped build.
The scent of roasting sweet potatoes fills the air. Children laugh, a marching band blares a brassy tune, and rows of bright banners flutter above the square. You're standing at the edge of the Gilmer Courthouse lawn, squinting into a crowd that stretches all the way to the bakery. Everywhere you look, there are yam pies, yam pancakes, yam sculptures, and even a yam-themed beauty queen waving from a parade float. It's loud, colorful, and strangely beautiful. You've made it to the Yamboree. It's hard to believe this festival grew from a crop that once lived in the corner of your garden, second to corn and not even as dependable as peas. But here it is, a full-fledged celebration of the humble yam, complete with royalty, revelry, and more than a few bewildered out-of-towners wondering how a root vegetable inspired an entire town to throw a party. You walk slowly through the crowds. A boy nearly runs into you, clutching a candied yam on a stick. A girl in a sash and a sparkling tiara hands you a flyer. A gospel choir sings near the church steps. You nod politely, tip your hat, and let the noise wash over you like river water over smooth stones. But in your heart, something quieter stirs. You remember a time when there were no festivals, no floats, no streetlights. You remember when the courthouse didn't even exist, just a giant oak tree where justice was shouted and sometimes settled with fists. You remember when every face was familiar and every road was dirt, when survival meant swinging an axe and praying for rain. But look at this place. Gilmer has schools, theaters, and stores with glass windows. The streets are paved, the sidewalks swept, and the kids, Lord, the kids, they talk about radio shows and airplanes like it's nothing. One of them asked you last week if you ever rode a dinosaur. You laughed until your ribs hurt. Historians still debate whether small-town America lost something essential in the shift from frontier life to modern convenience. They argue about authenticity, about grit, about what makes a place real. But you've lived it. Every era, every turn of the wheel, and what you've learned is simpler. People adapt. That's what makes them real. You adapted. You had to. You swung your first axe in a world that had no cars, no trains, and no electricity. You hunted deer where there are now bank buildings. You heated your first cabin with wood you chopped yourself. Now you have a stove that lights with a knob and a telephone that rings even when you don't want it to. But even as the town rises around you, the forest never truly leaves your bones. You still walk with your shoulders back, eyes scanning the horizon like you're expecting a panther or a storm. You still carry a knife out of habit. You still sleep light, ears tuned to wood and wood. It's not paranoia, it's memory, and it whispers to you in the quiet moments. At the festival, an old friend finds you near the pie stand. He's older now, hair mostly gone, belly not what it used to be, but his eyes still hold the same glint they had when you were teenagers chasing wild hogs across the thicket. You shake hands. You talk slow. You share a bench and watch the kids spin in circles like leaves in a strong wind. He asks if you ever thought it would turn out like this. You say not once. But here you are. You pass by a booth where someone is selling photos of old Gilmer, black and white prints of the town square, the train station, the first automobile stuck in the mud. You lean closer and spot yourself in one, young, lean, standing in front of a sawmill with arms crossed and a sliver of a smile. It doesn't feel like yesterday. It feels like another life. A boy walks by holding your father's hand, pointing at the same photo. He says, "That's so cool. Look how old everything is." You smile because you remember when it was new. Evening settles in. The lights along the street glow warm and gold. Someone begins strumming a guitar, soft and slow, and the air takes on that sleepy magic that always comes after a long, joy-filled day. You sit near the courthouse watching the sun dip behind the hills. The trees that still line the edges of town cast long shadows. Some of them are descendants of the very pines you once chopped, replanted by careful hands or left to grow wild. The spirit of the forest, that quiet resilience, that rootedness, it never left.
It just learned how to live in different clothes, in storefronts and bandstands, in school books and Sunday sermons, in laughter, in family, in the way people show up for one another no matter how strange the world becomes. The Yamboree, silly as it seems, is part of that. It's how the town remembers. It's how you remember. And as the stars come out and the music drifts higher and the scent of sweet potatoes gives way to night air, you close your eyes. You were there when the trees ruled the land. You were there when the first axe rang out. You built, endured, changed, adapted. And now, sitting under electric lights in a sky full of memory, you know the truth. The forest is still with you. Always has been, always will be. Let your breathing slow now. Let the parade fade behind you. The music, the laughter, the scent of yams all slipping gently into the hush of evening. You're not walking the dirt roads anymore. You're not splitting logs or hauling water. You're resting. Finally. After a life full of noise, of change, of storms and seasons, you're sitting in stillness. The stars above whisper the same stories they told your ancestors, and the wind through the branches sounds just like it did a century ago. It reminds you you were never just passing through. You were part of this place. Your footprints are in the soil. Your voice echoes in the hills. Your hands helped shape what others now call home. Tomorrow, children will play under electric lights. People will scroll on devices you've never imagined, but that doesn't erase what came before. It builds on it. You were the roots. They are the leaves. And the canopy, vast and unbroken, continues. So close your eyes now. Feel the wood grain beneath your fingers warm from the sun. Hear the crickets singing in the distance. Let yourself drift slowly, gently, into the arms of the old woods. The journey's done for tonight. Sleep well, old pioneer.